we know ArcMap is going away. So I kind of want to talk just briefly about the timeline where we're at now. So currently we're in extended support, which means you can call us where you can set up a case. Mature support, you'll lose some of that ability, and then in retired, they will leave the information on ArcGIS on the website. You can find help, but they will no longer help us with ArcMap. So that is the stick, right? That's how maybe you're here because, again, you're being forced to. We know we're running out of time for ArcMap, but what I wanted to talk about in all of these, so I'm not doing the other two, but I wanted to touch on the other two webinars that we're doing, because these are all the carrots. These are all the awesome things that are happening in ArcGIS Pro. I started in Pro 5 years ago. When I started at CloudPoint, I was kind of a guinea pig. They said, how long can you work in Pro without needing to go to ArcMap? And at that time, it was about 6 months. I had to move to ArcMap for something. The list of reasons to go back to ArcMap are getting fewer and far between. There's so many reasons to go to Pro. And these 6 things that we're going to talk about over the webinar series are 6 of the coolest ones and the ones that we use. So we'll talk about attribute rules, maybe get into notebooks today. And then our next one, exploring data with the data engineering tools, creating layouts, and then sharing and consuming data in our last one. So I want to make sure you guys know what we're going to talk about in those. And with that, I'm going to dive into a demo. Let me close a couple windows here. So what the demo set, the data set I have today is a small address point data set. They'll mention NG911 data. We do a lot of work with that. And that's really how we got started with attribute rules. So that's the example that I'm going to walk through today. So I'm going to want to open up my address points table here. So if you've been in the NG911 data or even just your address data, you know that there's a lot of fields. What I want to focus on today is I've got 3 fields that are interconnected. So I've got a street name field, I've got a legacy street name field, which needs, in this case, I need to have a second field for it, but it is the same data that's in the other field. And then I have another one at the end here that's a full road name field. And that is being used to, or I'll show you how we can use it to compare to a master street name table. So any street name needs to match what's in here. And so that is why I have this concatenated field in the address points table so that we can compare that to the master street name table. I wanted to show really quickly here, first of all, because we're going to, through this process, we're going to have a couple fields added to the address table. And I wanted to show that they'll show up here at the end. And then also in the geodatabase, we're going to have some other tables that are going to be added. So just wanted to show at the beginning that they don't exist yet. But back to these 3 fields, if I want to make an edit to this address point, say the road name changed, they were addressed here off of this road, and now they want to be addressed off of the other road. So I need to make that change. So right now, without any attribute rules, I have to change it in these 3 spots, which is obviously, as I type here and don't have my caps lock on, lots of room for error. So that's one attribute rule I want to write. I want to be able to say, if I change the street name here, please make that change here. And we're going to add another attribute rule that will also change this field here. So as we jump in, I'm going to discard those changes. So now we're going to find the attribute rules. I right click on address points, and I'm going to go to data design and attribute rules to open that table. I'm going to give us a little bit more room here. So no rules yet. We have 3 types. We'll do one of each. So we've got calculation rules, which, just like it sounds, Esri named these very well. So as you're working, it's going to make changes for you. You have the option to make it a batch calculation rule, which will happen batched. It'll happen when you tell it to, but we're not going to get into that today. We have constraint rules, which as you're working prevents bad edits. And then validation rules, which after you've made some edits, you want to check some things on the back end. So they don't necessarily stop the bad edit from happening, but they'll find it later. So those are the three types. We're going to start with the calculation rule, and I'm just going to click add rule and pull up my finished one so I can steal from it. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is calculate this legacy street name from the street name. So super easy, just to get us familiar with where everything is. I'm going to copy and paste. So this is called, the name of the rule is going to be legacy street name calculation. I get rid of that N. And what we like to do is put as much in the description as we can, so we know what we intended when we wrote that, when we wrote the rule. So if something breaks, we'll know, hey, this is what we meant. So we're going to do a calculation, and we'll talk about the triggers here, insert and update. A calculation rule populating the legacy street name field with the value from the street name. So I need to tell it which field it's calculating, and it's going to calculate the legacy street name field. And our expression, again, super easy. None of what I'm going to show today is complicated because coding gets complicated quickly, but I want to show you how and where to access that. And then you can find your coding experts at Google to help you write those arcade expressions. So these rules are written in arcade. And what I want to do is just populate this with the street name field. So simply going to add that there. You have an opportunity to put an error number and error message. If you choose to batch calculate these, then you can do some validation with it as well. We're not going to do that today, but triggers are important. So when do you want this calculation to fire? So I want to make sure when I put in a new address point, it works, it triggers, and also if I make any updates, that it'll rerun that calculation and make sure everything is always up to date. So we've got some options for execution, and this exclude from application evaluation. It's a little bit tricky. I'm just going to quickly read what I found from Google. So essentially, if you don't want a rule to be evaluated until all your edits are made, so at the very end, then you would enable that option. If you, I'm so confused even as I'm reading it, but it has to do with when. Is it gonna make that edit, run that rule as I'm editing or after I'm all done and I hit apply edit? So we're gonna leave that unchecked today, but that is an option there. Again, we can batch calculate that if we want, and then there's a disable function if you want to temporarily disable that. So with all of those done, I'm gonna hit save. And then we'll go test it out. So I got my address point pulled up over here. And if I just type in a street name, then that updated. Again, one-to-one, super easy, but wanted to show you, get us warmed up into how we can make these rules. So we're going to add another one that's a little bit more complicated. And we're going to calculate that full road name field. And this one, similarly, I want to make sure we have a good description. So we're going to calculate, again, it's going to be insert and update. It's a rule that'll populate the full name field. So this, maybe come back over here. This one at the very end, this full road name field, because we're going to use that to compare it to the master street name table. We want to make sure it stays up to date. So I skipped over this. I don't have any subtypes, but if you had subtypes, you could apply it to just those subtypes. I'm going to calculate the full name field. That's where that is. I also skipped over whether or not I want this field to be editable. So if I uncheck that, the only way that field is going to be editable is with this attribute rule, which for this case is perfect. I don't want anybody accidentally updating this. So I'm going to leave that unchecked so it is not editable. And then this expression, so if you just, if you were just to concatenate all your fields, we've got a lot of null values in these things that we're throwing together. So if you just do a straight concatenate, you're going to get some errors. So we've got a function that will create an array and then concatenate at the end after is ignored those nulls. So I'm going to hit, but again, this is where you get people to help you, or you Google it, or you know Arcade yourself. This is where it can get fun and do a lot of work for you. So I'm gonna
Hey, Aaron,
check.
just
Yeah.
quick question. Someone's wondering, what version of Pro are you running?
Great question. 3.1.1, I think. I just did that final update. And with that, there's some changes that we can run now. We can do some validation rules on a file geo database where before it had to be branch version. So great question. I wish I had said that at the beginning, but thank you. So I'm going to hit OK here, and I've got that expression. I'm again want to insert and update, and I'm going to leave this one alone. So this happens all the time. The save button is grayed out because I've got edits that I already made. I'm actually going to discard the edits so that I can then save this attribute rule. So now if I make a change to that street name, changing that to easy, and then I've got the legacy street name change. If I come down here, I have also edited that. So a little bit of work on the front end saves a lot of errors on the back end. All right, so those are calculation rules. Now it gets even more fun. We're going to do a constraint rule. And this is where we want to make sure that that full road name value exists in our master street name table. So I'm going to add this rule. They're all set up the same. They just work a little bit differently. Go right up to the top. So I'm checking that the street name is in the master street name table. My description to tell me that is a constraint rule to ensure that that full name, and I'm going to put the field names here. Again, if something changes, then we'll know what we intended to begin with. And then this expression, this is from the, what's over here, the address data management. They've got a lot of great attribute rules already built in. So I pulled that one over, changed the name of my field because it wasn't exactly the same. So this will then review that master street name table and give me an error. It will not let me finish editing if it doesn't exist there. So I'm going to hit save there. And this is where I can give it an error number, and we'll see where those show up later. And then an error message. There's something in there. Again, insert and delete, insert and update. So anytime I put a new one in or update it, I want to see that. So all the rest of the settings are the same. I'm going to go ahead and save that edit there, and then save this rule. And we'll see immediately it is recognized that this easy way does not exist in the rule. So I already made that change. It's not going to stop me because I saved that edit. But if I tried to make another change, it will not let me save that change because I still have a problem with this. So we'll come back to that, fix it, but it's nice that it immediately recognizes when that rule is not being followed. But also what it will do, and I kind of showed that before, but if I change this one to main, it's going to give me that same error. So actually I'm going to change it here. So this is where I should be changing the values. And it's immediately recognizing main way does not exist in my master street name table. So I either need to fix this or go to my master street name table and add that value if it's legitimate. So for now, I'm going to cancel that. Let me know if there's any questions on either of those two. I'm going to jump to validation.
Yeah, we're good right now. But
okay, thanks.
Go ahead, guys. If you've got anything, submit them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to what we can.
Yep. Okay, this is the fun part. Just check and make sure I didn't skip over anything. So validation rules, again, this happens after you've made some edits. You're checking maybe the address points against the road center lines, something you don't want to check in the moment, but you do want to check later. These used to only be available in branch versioning. So I'm pretty new to this. I found it as I was preparing for this webinar. It's very exciting to be able to get that functionality locally that we had previously had to make a branch version of the data set that we were evaluating. So they're set up very similarly. So I'm just going to add a rule, and this one's going to be simple, again, just to show how they work. And then you can use your imagination to create your own. But let's see, let's start at the top. So all I'm going to do here, I'm just going to check that my zip code is what I want it to be. So in my small data set, I know that there's only one zip code value that I should have. Obviously, you could have a list of zip codes, but we're just going to make it simple here so that we you know, don't make errors in a live demo on something complicated. So I've got my zip code needs to be 61571. So that is the expression. Again, error number, I'm going to just give it a different number and give it an error message here. You can change severity. So after we evaluate this, they'll show up in the error inspector, just like topology, and you can now filter by the severity. So if you knew this was a 5, it was a big deal, I had to fix it first, you could label it 5. If it's not that big of a deal, you could label it 1, and then you can filter that later. And the rest there, we're going to leave the same. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and save.
So we had a quick question. Were you using the address data management solution?
So that expression was from that solution, but I'm not using it, just hijacked it from those attribute rules. Okay, so I've got that created. Let's go. So as soon as I added that validation rule, I got an extra field here on my address points. And this is where you're going to know, do you need to calculate? Do you need to evaluate your data? And do you have an error or not? So it tells you those 3 things. So I created the rule, but I have not validated it all, which is why they're all going to say validation required and no error, because it can't know yet if I have an error. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go back to my map. Let's close. No, I'll leave those open. Just want to make sure you guys can see. So I'm going to open the error inspector, and it's going to tell me there's no errors in my map, which is fine because we haven't put any in there yet. So let me open this, and I still don't have any tables here. What you have to do first is run the evaluate rules geoprocessing tool. On that workspace, got the option to do calculation and or validation rules. I'm just going to check both of those. And then your extents, I'm just going to do default. It'll run it on all. So I'm going to run that. And so when I go, see if that, I think that changes anything here. I still have my validation status. But if I go back to my catalog and I refresh this, I will see now I've got those tables where it's keeping track of those errors. And I just looked at the time. We're not going to get to notebooks today. I'm sorry, but I'm very excited about this. So we've got that. We still don't have any error layers. So look over here, I right click, this is where it should be. When I Googled, hey, why is it not there? It's because Pro doesn't recognize it. So if I close this and open that up again, that the ability to add those error layers to the map should be there. So let's open that up. So now if I right click on address points, I have address error layers or add error layers. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if that'll get fixed in another patch, but closing and opening it then adds those error layers. And so this is what you would see if you were branch versions, but it now lives here. And so now if I open my error inspector, I now have a table. So let's see if so we've got one error there, got a couple errors. So the only one I was checking really was the zip code. So I can zoom to, again, this works like topology. You can zoom to it. I'll select that and quickly find what's wrong. So my zip code is wrong. I will fix the zip code. And then like topology, sorry, this is not pinned. Okay. Like with topology, then you have to evaluate your rules. It's just reevaluating. You've got some choices there as to how you do it. But if I evaluate, then it's gone. If I went to edit another one and again, this we're evaluating on the back end. So I'm allowed to make the error on the front end. We'll save. But if I evaluate, that error is going to be there. So super excited this is available in a local geodatabase. And I think it opens up the possibilities to use it for more.